All right. So, hey, everyone out
Okay.
there in YouTube land. We decided to come on a few minutes early just to say hello.
There's so many people joining from so many places already, the early ones, that we just couldn't wait. We wanted to say good day to Australia and hello to boa noite to Rio Grande do Sul do Brasil.
Oh, here we
Really
go.
bad,
Oh, she's
really
so
bad.
There you go.
I had a fantastic trip to Brazil shortly before lockdown. So we've got people from Kansas City, from Israel, New Jersey.
But we have to have a special shout out to Alan Katz, who was in Israel and went to the first session and now is back for the second session. Thanks so much.
For punishment.
He's either a glutton for punishment or he really likes the work. I don't know which.
Yeah, we figured we might as well join a little early, have fun.
This is, yeah, you know, I think there's just a different vibe for the 8 p.m. session. You know what I mean? It's a lot more cash, just a lot more.
All the best people.
That's
I
right,
think
all
there's
the
going
best
to be
people.
a football game in the background.
It's Gary's catching the last couple minutes. I don't even know who's playing tonight.
No spoilers. He's taping everything.
Yeah, that's anybody who tries to put scores in the chat, I'm going to delete them and kick you out of the chat. So there you go.
We have really tight security filters, and that's one of them.
John from the Bronx, good to see you.
Yeah, we had a great afternoon session, and this is really fun to have.
My Wayne Quebec jersey just arrived.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Got a lot of people coming from Australia. Very cool. I'm sure.
I think the afternoon was a lot of.
Australia has a really good lockdown. You can't leave more than 5 kilometers from your house.
Peter, good to see you.
We had a really big, oh, that's funny. We had a really big draw from Central America, Mexico.
That's
I
great.
See Katie from Managua is here representing.
I was going to mention last time you said Managua. I said I've been to Managua, but that's only partially true. I was in the airport while they were blowing things up and they wouldn't let us leave the plane. So I haven't actually been to Managua. It's been a long time, but I'd love to go back.
I don't know if it counts. Oh, we have.
Yeah, I don't think it counts.
Airports.
No. Not even airport, just the runway.
Say hi to say hi to my former colleague and friend and neighbor, Michelle Bernard. Good to see you, Michelle.
Oh, you're a regular Miss Louise.
So we're gonna.
I see Toadie.
We're gonna start here in about a minute or two. We haven't started the formal presentation yet, so just welcoming people as they come in, and like I said, we'll give it a couple more minutes. We have over 300 people who registered for this session, so hopefully we'll get a few more folks coming in right on the time.
And try not to, the people who are in a nighttime time zone will, I assure you, you will be in for a treat. You will not be put to sleep. It's not just Will and me droning on.
No, not like you.
No, there's
more.
There's more people droning on.
Hey, Gary, and Sylvia, just so you know, I'm gonna share my screen first, and then I'll cut it off, and then you guys can grab it. All right.
Okay.
Hey, Garrett, good to see you.
Philly representing.
There you go.
So should we get started?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let me share my screen, and then I'll hit record, and we'll officially begin here.
Okay.
All right, hold on one sec.
I'm holding.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so welcome everyone from wherever you are in the world. Really exciting to have you this evening from where we are. I'm on the East Coast in the US. I'm Homa Tavangar, and my co-founder for the Big Questions Institute, Will Richardson, also on the East Coast. And we are joined by the wonderful Gary Stager and Sylvia Martinez from the West Coast in the US, and all of you tuning in from around the world. It is really wonderful to share another free webinar. We've been really committed at the Big Questions Institute since founding this project and really building it up over the pandemic, to offer as much as we can to help educators, and particularly leaders in education, navigate through this crisis and not go back to status quo, but to really build and create and dream new models and new ways of looking at the world and looking at learning. So I won't take too much more time, but I want to also share that tonight's session and this series of webinars, we are really delighted to have a partner with Blackbaud K-12. So Blackbaud Solutions for K-12 schools provides a connected whole school management system, including cloud-based admissions and enrollment, student and learning management, tuition management, and accounting and fundraising. And we are really delighted that Blackbaud is partnering with us. Visit their page, learn what they do. They have a special Big Questions Institute page at bit.ly/BQI Blackbaud. You can access it easily and learn about our sponsor, and then also learn about some of the work that we're doing at the Big Questions Institute. So I want to turn it over to Will, who's going to introduce our fantastic speakers.
Thanks so much, Homa. And Gary, you can share your screen at any point that you're ready. But hello, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see so many of you here. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Gary Stager and Sylvia Martinez tonight, who are two people who have had a really big influence on my thinking as I've evolved from a classroom teacher into kind of a writer and author and speaker, and now hopefully someone who's helping people kind of make sense of the world. Gary actually sent me, I mentioned this on the afternoon call too, and I just mentioned it again, but Gary sent me a pile of books one day, came unsolicited to my door. And the good news is that I actually read them. And they really gave me a very different perspective on the world of education, one that I hadn't really gotten very much when I was going through my pre-service program, and one that I hadn't thought too much about even when I was teaching. So I just appreciate these two very, very much. And they have incredibly important things to say in general, but I think especially now when we're in the midst of this very complex and challenging moment with COVID and everything else that's going on in the world. You know, we have been forced into these remote kind of schooling environments, hybrid schooling environments. And I think a lot of people are now finally getting maybe a little comfortable with the technology, but now they're starting to ask what we think is a big question, and that is, how can we make the most out of these technologies? How can we make the most out of this situation and not just do school the way we've been doing it? And so that's what Gary and Sylvia are going to talk about tonight. And then the really good news for us is that they have agreed to do a 2-day, 4-hour workshop. We'll give you more information on that at the end. But that's going to happen in a couple of weeks. And they're going to do a deep dive into lots of different ways that you can begin to implement some great learning opportunities around projects and using technology to create and construct things and connect kids and authors and all sorts of other stuff. And give you a lot of practical ideas around how to make this happen. But for tonight, at least, a little bit of an overview on what's possible. And hopefully this will expand your thinking and inspire you. I know a lot of people walked away inspired this afternoon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Stager and Sylvia Martinez. Thanks for being here, you guys.
Hello, world. Hi. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Homa. This is an incredible opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting us and providing this platform. This is such an important topic. Before we get started, to introduce myself, my name is Sylvia Martinez. If you're not familiar with Gary Stager and my work, most recently we've co-authored the book Invent to Learn, Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom. But my career started as an aerospace engineer. veered into video game design. I've run educational nonprofits, been an executive in the software and video game industry, and have spent the last decade or so trying to merge those ideas of helping schools provide real experiences for kids, especially in the areas of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And so this is an amazing time that we're living in now, and we're happy to share it with you.
And I'm Gary Stager. I've been working the last 38 years in education, largely in teacher education, trying to help teachers take advantage of the wondrous opportunities that exist to learn not just the things that we've always wanted kids to learn, maybe with greater efficiency or efficacy or comprehension, but to create opportunities to learn and do in ways that are unimaginable otherwise, and to leave the world a better place for kids.
So we're going to talk a little bit today using this agenda. These are 4 areas that we think are important for teachers and communities to think about when we're in this hybrid remote learning situation we're in now. And it also reflects the structure of the workshops we're going to do. So in each area, we're going to be doing a deeper dive with more practical resources, more example, hands-on. But today, we just have the time for an introduction. And we hope we do leave you with some good value. There are resources. Everything we talk about is on a website, invent2learn.com/questions. So anything we talk about, any link, any resource that you can do the deep dive on your own if you want to. To start with, you know, we really wanted to think to live up to the big question idea of this. You know, we read your questions. We saw many of you wrote questions in on your registration, and they were big questions. There were existential questions. There were people wondering about the future of education, about what to do today, about different kinds of, you know, modes and hybrid versus remote versus Zoom and room and Zoom situations, and how to handle it and how to plan and what to do. And those are incredibly important, and we're going to try and sort of answer as many of those as we can in the course of the day. You know, we hope to contribute to this conversation that you're having every day, and we know that you are living this, and you're living with different administrations, different communities, different abilities to make change, and we hope we can provide some answers for some inspiration. So when we look at the horizon of what's happening out there, there's just an incredible array of things. But one thing that we know is that, as Richard Haass, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, said, the pandemic will accelerate history rather than reshape it. What's happening and where we're going in the future is coming faster because of the pandemic. It's not taking a left turn. It's not completely changing it. It's just making something happen that was going to happen already. The trends of society as they were going, of people working more from home and being more online and breaking down the walls of the school, were all something that was coming.
Inevitable.
That was exactly inevitable.
You know, and yet we have a lot of situations where kids are going back to school and sitting in cells and having orders barked at them from the person at the front of the room, or from a remote location beamed on the interactive whiteboard, while an iPad is propped up on a chair at the back of the room, streaming to the kids who aren't physically in the classroom. And we should recognize that this isn't the best that we can do, that we can actually be using these technologies to make learning more intimate, more social, more collaborative, not more distant, not more isolated. I like to say that schools have an obligation to introduce children to things they don't yet know they love. That's why school exists. That's why kids get up in the morning and go 180 times a year. That's what our value proposition is. How can we produce opportunities for kids to be introduced to things that they don't yet know they love? So we've been making some suggestions in a number of articles that you could read on the website about how do we cope with today. And one piece of advice is that we should slow down. One of the great affordances of this crazy period is that we've got nothing but time. And yet in traditional school settings, the scarcest resource is time. So now we can slow down a little bit. We should teach like we know better. This is an opportunity to revive sound pedagogical principles and practices, to reignite an interest in genre study or process writing or interdisciplinary projects, or the other good stuff that we know is incredibly valuable to kids, that produces a context for learning and yet has been abandoned for any number of reasons over the past generation or two, often sacrificed to insufficient time. We now have the time to teach well if we choose to do so. So there's lots of things we can do. We can launch kids in open-ended learning adventures where we set them with a challenge or a prompt and they spend weeks or months working on something that really matters, and digging deeply and collaborating with one another and being creative and apprenticing with people that are not within the four walls of the classroom. Kids can read full books instead of pieces of things. We can inspire projects that are more substantive. We can invite kids to learn things on their own, like the Let Grow project. We can encourage kids to learn new tools and software that might be valuable to our entire community. We have time to engage in discussions, whole group, small group, one-on-one, back channel, where we can be engaged in more intimate conversation. And that can include an exploration of current events and a discussion of what's going on in the world. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we have genuine opportunities to apprentice with experts and peers and to share our own expertise, because kids know stuff. I was in a webinar recently with the educators from Reggio Emilia, Italy, a system that's been largely recognized over the last few decades as being among the most innovative, sophisticated, humane, effective educational systems in the world. And they were referring to the times in which we find ourselves as the dictatorship of COVID-19. And while the dictatorship requires that we have to put health and safety first, they were very strong and consistent in the fact that we need to live our values. We need to preserve what matters. That in a time of such ugliness and deprivation, we need to add more beauty, more richness, more texture, humanity to the educational experiences. We need to be purposeful in living our values. And one of the practical ways we could do that is to use cohorts in a more sensible way. I know schools that have gone to hybrid models where some kids are at home and some kids are in classrooms. And as Sylvia said, the teacher is forced into this Zoom and room context where they're performing at the front of the room and there's a group of kids at home who are just watching a tiny video of it, and the backs of the heads of their peers. It would seem to me that a sensible approach to that would be, if you've got a third or 20% of the kids who aren't coming physically to school, you would group them together so that they could be with one teacher who could meet their unique needs online, that could provide synchronous and asynchronous experiences for them. There are homeschoolers or not even homeschoolers, there are families that are getting together, and each day of the week in their bubble, they're going to each other's home and being responsible for the kids being in class together. And in one case that I'm aware of, they actually went to the school and said, hey, here's a crazy idea. Why don't you put all of our kids in the same class? So when school reopens, they know each other. They've been working with one teacher. So taking a deep breath, stepping back, and finding a way to inject some common sense into this process can enrich the experience as well. My colleague Brian Harvey from the University of California, Berkeley, likes to say that the key to school reform is get rid of half the curriculum, any half. We need to slow down. We need to edit the morbidly obese curriculum. Less is more. That goes for not just the curricular content, but how much the teacher does versus how much the kids are engaged in. We need to shift the balance of who's doing the work in the classroom. Alan Kay, the gentleman responsible for the development of the personal computer, was fond of saying a point of view is worth 80 IQ points. During the workshop and in the writing we've been doing, we're encouraging teachers to shift their point of view and think about some of these things differently, stand them on their head. So if instead of getting rid of art, music, science labs, drama, video production, making things, the stuff that matters to kids, the stuff that they can't do so readily on the internet or can't do so well, the stuff that is the reason why they get up in the morning and go to school, instead of boxing that up and shipping it off to an undisclosed warehouse location until the crisis is over, it would be nice if schools would say, that's the stuff that matters. That's our sweet spot. That's our value proposition. How do we ensure that those things continue? And we work backwards from there to make sure that we can do them in some form that's safe, that respects the virus. One of the biggest ideas that shapes all of my work is less us, more them. Anytime you think you should intervene on behalf of an educational transaction, it's worth asking a question. How can I do less so they can do more? How can I shift as much agency to the learner as possible? And that's all deeply rooted in the Piagetian idea that knowledge is a consequence of experience. Knowledge is a consequence of experience. There's no substitute for experience. And regardless of the criticism or any diagnosis of a problem in education, I think can almost always be reduced to an absence of experience or the imposition of a fake or impoverished, denatured experience when a real one was readily available.
You know, and this has been said for decades, centuries. Maria Montessori said, never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed. The idea that kids are competent and should be given agency over what they do is not a new idea. We just have to find new ways to implement that in these remote and hybrid learning situations. You know, in flipping the script sometimes, you can find even more imaginative ways to do projects that have been great before. A lot of teachers who got excited about the maker movement were teaching kids how to do design with 3D printers. And yet, one of the biggest things that you have to spend time on is figuring out how to actually print the thing. Well, if we can't print the thing this month, this year, we can still have an exceptional design experience. And in fact, by embracing the constraint, it actually frees you to do more designs that can't be printed. There are lots of things you can design in 3D that are simply unprintable. You can design characters for 3D animation games. This is Blender. This is free software that professional game animators use and is completely accessible to a motivated, you know, middle school, high school, more talented than me student. But allowing yourself to think beyond outside of these constraints, yet keeping the things that worked, like design, I think is really important. If you look at Minecraft, there's an incredible number of designs that have been put online with Minecraft that run the gamut from very realistic to fantasy. If you look at the hashtag like impossible creations in Minecraft, you will be blown away. And these are things that some kids might really like and might really decide to work on in a very deep way. If they're working off the computer beyond what you've asked them to, I think that's a win. But it doesn't mean that every kid has to design a fantasy world in Minecraft. And in fact, some kids are thriving. You know, it may be the pandemic's dirty little secret is that some kids are finding out that they like sleeping in and doing their work later if there's asynchronous parts, that they like having control, that they like not having to be that they find out they're not being bullied, that they like being at home, they like their parents, they're having a good time, and they're thriving during this remote learning. So when we get past this remote learning, how do we keep the things that are working? We can't just say, okay, all you kids who were thriving at home, now come back to school and nothing's going to change. And we're going to put everything back the way it was before where you were miserable.
And stay on the rug.
And sit on the rug. We have to be thinking about what we're learning now that we can continue in the future. Inform
our future practice. You know, the great jazz musician Jimmy Heath was fond of saying, what was good is good. You know, if you look at the bookshelves behind us, when I have administrators in particular say to me, oh, if only we knew what to do. I say, swing by my house. I've got 2,000 books I can lend you. Each one of them will tell you what to do. We stand on the shoulders of giants. There's an incredible amount of wisdom in the history of education that we can build practices upon. And those things that were good will be good going forward. And we can teach for tomorrow by embracing the best principles and practices of the past. But first, we have to be able to answer some questions ourselves. I turned Will on to Seymour Saracen, and one of the books that we both really love is called And What Do You Mean by Learning? And it talks about the fact that we scarcely ever have a conversation about what learning actually means when we talk about teaching and learning. I'm looking at the syllabi of a lot of educational leadership programs today, and they not only don't talk about learning, they don't talk about teaching. At best, they're education appreciation courses that are kind of an overview of policy and of over time. But we also need to be able to identify what we mean by teaching. That if we believe, as we do, that learning isn't the direct result of having been taught, then what does a teacher do? How does a teacher prepare an environment that welcomes kids to learning invitations, that allows them to share their own initiatives and ideas and questions and curiosity and talents and expertise, so that we can all collectively construct knowledge together?
You know, I find that one of the things that helps me when people say, well, you know, what's the right thing to do is to kind of have a learning manifesto, to know what I believe and be able to articulate it in a way that's simple for me to understand. And I believe that learning occurs when a new experience makes connections to existing knowledge, and that learning can't be delivered to the learner, and that the best way to ensure understanding inside your head is through active construction of things outside your head. And this isn't mine. I didn't make this up. I stole from really smart people. The first two are that Piagetian idea that knowledge is a consequence of experience. And the third is Seymour Papert's idea of constructionism, that learning happens best when you're making things that matter to you and it can be shared with an audience that's meaningful to you.
And those things don't need to be a robot or a paper mache volcano. They could be a poem, they could be a theory, they could be a conversation.
Right. And I think when you are able to have that idea in your head better, you're able to articulate it to others better. So some of the big questions that you asked were, how do I share what I believe with other people? And I think this is step one, is to try and have it clear in your head about what your beliefs are. And look, you don't have to have the same manifesto as me. Absolutely. This is, you know, open source manifesto season. Make your own. Go back to a book that you read when you were a beginning teacher, because we're all starting from square one these days. What was meaningful to you then? What made it meaningful? Is it still meaningful? You know, be an investigator of learning.
You know, we should be skeptical of ideas that become wildly popular overnight. It's kind of it's amazing how a number of tools that none of us had heard of 6 months ago have been adopted and embraced by so many schools so
like
quickly.
Zoom.
And right, which was, well, Zoom is a great example of, you know, something that wasn't intended for education use that's being bent and shaped to the will of educators, which tends to be a much better approach than things that are designed with the classroom in mind, that have a notion of classroom and teaching and learning that are archaic or free of liberty and flexibility. You know, I found in my work all over the world that bad ideas spread quickly. They're timeless and they're impervious to geographic boundaries. But the best ideas are fragile and require nurturing. Recognizing that leads us to protect these ideas and to behave in a way that we're aware that when our ideas are quickly co-opted by the system and denatured. One of the ways in which this happens is the best learner-centered ideas quickly become teacher-centered. The things that kids can do, where they're at the center of the experience, the locus of control, quickly shift to teachers. So notions like classroom centers, where a kid can work independently and lose themselves in something and not be disruptive and not have to pay attention to what else is happening in the classroom, become the stations of the cross with a teacher with a watch and rules, and you go here and you go there, and become an allocation of resources and a classroom management technique rather than a learning opportunity. You know, the shift from students using Scratch to program and create and collaborate through 50 or 60 million projects and tens of millions of kids around the world quickly become curriculafied, and lots of discussions about teachers printing out the blocks to hang on classroom walls, and questions about how do I deliver this or that, or after, you know, what do I do after I've used Scratch twice? So I think the project should be a teacher's smallest unit of concern. This is how we get to the greatest innovation in classroom practice, whether a classroom is online or face-to-face or a combination of the two in a hybrid setting. And when the project is the smallest unit of concern, then the skills and the concepts that we want kids to have result from those experiences of working in the project. We recognize that problems aren't projects, and problems aren't even always problems. And practice isn't always practice. The kinds of problems you find at the end of a math unit in a textbook aren't the kinds of problems that mathematicians are engaged in. The kind of practice that you do in a math book isn't the kind of practice that you engage in to be a pianist. And projects are very different too. As Sylvia said, there's something that's shareable. They tend to connect disciplines and people and contexts and historical antecedents and communities and experts. There's a lot of discussion about design these days, and it's often framed in terms of iterative design, making a toothpaste tube better for a customer, solving a problem, repairing something, fixing something. But I'm a lot more excited and inspired by generative processes, where I introduce something to a kid, I show them 1 or 2 commands or how to do something simple, and that immediately evokes an idea for something else they want to try. And that idea evokes another idea, which evokes another idea. And if they're successful, they test a larger hypothesis, ask a deeper question, embellish, decorate. If they're unsuccessful, they engage in some debugging processes, which are incredibly important for intellectual development. But as teachers, we need to every so often take a deep breath and step back and ask ourselves, what's the nutritional value of this activity? And we're going to talk about this specifically in the workshops. Sometimes we lose the forest for the trees, and we've been doing something for so long that we've wrung all the nutritional value out of it. As soon as you hear that something is a tradition in a school, you should question its value, because it might be incredibly valuable, and that's why it's a tradition, or it might just become habit. And I'm obsessed with the question of what's the smallest seed I can plant that generates the largest flower, the most beautiful garden. What is it that I can do as a teacher that shifts maximum agency to the learner, where I can just sit back and be an audience member or a collaborator or a peer participating in some large production of knowledge construction without me being the choreographer or the conductor.
And, when you see kids in these kinds of environments, you hear them say different things about themselves. Like Talon, this is a quote from a teacher friend of mine, Jim Tiffin, shared with me, one of his students, who said, everything is a lot more simple to make. I can do things really quickly now that I know how to look at stuff. Now that sounds simple. That's what an 11-year-old would say, but think about how profound that is. It encompasses craftsmanship. It encompasses meaningful work. It's point of view. It's being able to see something and know that you have something to say about it, that you can fix things, you can make things. That's a powerful stance to take as a learner. And, a lot of times we assume that teachers can do this to students, that we can engage students somehow, that we can empower them. But this engagement comes from being engaged in meaningful work. Empowerment comes from doing powerful things that are important to you and important to a community that you can share it with. And I think there's a cycle that happens when students are involved in a community. And these communities can be built online. And it's about being a citizen. A citizen means that it's a two-way street, that you provide value to the community and the community provides value to you. And that's an empowering feeling of belonging. When kids learn to do things independently, they can step up. And having a voice that's talking about what they can do and what they have learned. The kids learn to trust themselves when this happens. And this can happen remotely in a hybrid situation, and in classrooms too.
And voice without action is propaganda and leads to disaffection, right? When you hear a parent say, I'm not smart enough to help my second grader with their homework, they're not saying they lack the intellectual ability to do second grade work. They're saying, thank God I don't have to do that crap. One of the things that's happening when we're going into people's homes, when we're bringing the educational process into their homes, is that lots of people are seeing the educational diet that's been on offer to kids for so many years. And they're really concerned about its value and how nutritious it is and whether it's worthy of their kids' time and energy.
So helping parents understand what's going on now is more than just explaining to them what's going to happen at 10:15 and 12:30. It's about inviting them to join a community in a brand new way and being part of this collective experience. And some of them are going to be more open to that. Some of them are not going to be able to participate. This is tough. There were questions that you guys posed that were spot on. What about the kids whose parents aren't there, or who don't have the capacity or the language or the educational background to help them with projects and tools. Yeah, all of this. And, this building a community from scratch is incredibly difficult to do. And we're doing it while we're building the plane while it's flying. I think a lot of teachers are beating themselves up way too much about not being immediately able to do this with absolutely no thought. I mean, you imagine what it felt like when you were a first-year teacher. That's everybody right now. There are no experts here. There's nobody who's figured this out. And certainly your parents and your community and your students haven't figured it out either. So give yourself a break. I mean, this is a difficult thing.
But view them as assets,
right?
As opposed to liabilities.
You don't have to figure it out a lot yourself. I shared in the resources that there's a study about a study you can share with parents about what they can do with their kids to help them be more technologically fluent. There's all kinds of things that they can do. And sometimes parents need these kinds of specific recommendations, and help.
One of the schools I've worked with a number of times, the American School of Bombay, has a parent R&D committee where the parents get together and they read the sorts of books you wish you had time to read about education reform, about innovation, about classroom practice, about epistemology and learning theory. And those parents then come together and feel like they're part of something larger than themselves, and they feel smart and they feel valued. And they're then used and useful for inspiring, for motivating, for sustaining innovation in the school context.
There's some really incredible resources online as well. There is a world of people participating in citizen science projects. These are projects where, experts, lay people, kids, adults, retired people come together to collect data, share information, and explore. And these are available online. I put some of the links to them in the resources. For example, if some of your kids have pets, wouldn't it be fun to participate in a real research project about whether dogs can can your dog sing? I mean, this is a real project that was there, and it doesn't mean that everyone has a dog or wants to participate in this project. It's just one of the things that are available.
And it's infinitely more sophisticated and complex than, a typical data activity of who likes dogs, who likes cats, raise your hand, add it up, make a spreadsheet.
There are thousands of these online. This is one from Cornell about celebrating urban birds, which gives you another opportunity to expand your online community. A grandparent in another city or another country could participate in this project as well.
We need to seize the remarkable opportunities that are being afforded to us by experts who are generously sharing their expertise online. I've been just absolutely amazed by what I've seen over the last 6-7 months. I have had teachers literally say to me or ask me questions like, I teach high school physics, what can I do? It's, well, imagine if you could study with Galileo or Einstein. And now these are the kinds of hyperbolic promises that have been made at ed tech conferences for decades. However, it's coming true. This is Stephen Wolfram. He's largely considered one of the world's leading authorities on math, science, computer science, computational thinking. He's recently embarked on a project that he is immodestly saying is going to reinvent the world of physics. And he's providing the tools and his data and his notes and his time and interacting with lay people and professionals alike to explore these questions that he has, to test his hypotheses, to confirm his experiments, and also to offer Ask Me Anything sessions for kids where one of the world's leading scientists, is available to kids to ask any question about anything they're interested in having to do with math and science. This is a remarkable opportunity, and yet far too few of us are taking advantage of things like fundamental theory of physics for kids. And this is a recording of one of these sessions that he led that I found on YouTube recently that kind of took my breath away, because it was using his tools built upon Wolfram language, which is this remarkable kind of alchemy that he created in software form that's being used by all the major researchers in the world to model and simulate and to analyze sophisticated data sets. And here they're exploring coronavirus data. And he was showing kids how to do it in real time, and they were able to engage in the experiment with them and look at data from around the world and overlay it on maps, and have a deeper understanding of how viruses spread generally, and more specifically how COVID-19 spreads. And it's interesting, if you look at the date on this screen, this live coding with kids was from February 10th of this year. You know, we have lots of politicians saying, I didn't know about COVID until, yesterday. But imagine if we had kids all over the world who had been working with scientists 8 months ago to come to a deeper understanding of the pandemic. There's lighter fare available. Jacques Pepin and Michael Simon and Jamie Oliver are leading daily cooking lessons for kids, not to mention all of the reality television that allows you to apprentice with experts through your screen. Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives has been doing a remote edition where chefs from restaurants around the country are shipping materials to Guy Fieri and his family, just like you can send books to kids or microbits or other materials to them, and then inspiring them to work with them and creating things that matter. And you learn a ton through this. We're also learning that the technology is allowing us to reinvent new art forms and new forms of expression and new ways of doing old things, but also new ways to do new things. American Idol was produced mid-pandemic, mid-season when the pandemic struck, by sending each of the contestants 3 iPhones. And the idea that that's possible, that Lester Holt is hosting the nightly news from his apartment with a TV behind him as his entire set, should inspire us to think about how we could reinvent education to not only keep it going at the level that we've come to expect, but to create opportunities for us to do things that wouldn't have been imaginable just a couple of years ago.
And that's an invitation that has to come, to young people, because a lot of times the things that they do that are creative, they never connect the dots that this could be done in an educational way.
And the technology that we've been banning and confiscating is saving your bacon. 2020 is the 30th anniversary of me working in the first schools in the world where every kid had a laptop. And for 30 years, I've been a heretic talking about the idea that we should provide a laptop for every kid in the world, that we're the richest country in the history of history, and we can afford a cello and a laptop for every kid. And yet that was an impossible idea that very few people got behind until now, when all of a sudden laptops started falling from the sky and ended up in everyone's bedrooms. We can not only talk to Wynton Marsalis online or watch Chick Corea practice an hour a day, but we can see our favorite musicians talking about the music that inspires them, talking about their craft. And this extends to all sorts of communities of practice. You can apprentice with some of the world's finest musicians. I got a 5th grader in Australia a subscription to online piano lessons because he expressed his interest in doing so. And we can recognize that even things like making can be done safely during these times. That maybe we can't have the makerspace and have access to all the materials, and because we're afraid of leaning over one another or disinfecting surfaces. But programming is perfectly suited for a pandemic. It's a makerspace that's between your ears, and there are a dozen programming environments that were designed for learners that have a low threshold and high ceiling that allow people to do things that were unimaginable a couple of years ago, in most cases right through your browser.
Even programming languages that you think have added amazing new features recently. The new Scratch has this video sensing capability that has been barely talked about. But if you look on Twitter and you follow some hashtags, there are some really interesting things. That's programming that senses what's happening from a real world camera in real time, meaning you can build a diorama with a cartoon that lives in your cardboard box. This can be happening in every home. It's all online. And you can follow these hashtags, or you can appoint a kid to keep track of the hashtags. What's new on the computational tinkering hashtag on, that they come back every Tuesday and report on that. You can just find things at random. I noticed someone followed me, a teacher in Cuba followed me. I clicked on her Twitter thread and immediately saw that she'd shared a project where she had animated characters from books, and when she holds up the book cover, it recognizes the book cover and animates the characters. All of this is available. All the instructions for this are available on the Scratch website.
Because sharing is one of the ethos.
Sharing is caring
of these days, and this also requires us to shift our perspective a little bit from the idea of curriculum delivery, of the teachers who have the audacity to say, we do a little Scratch, or we finished Scratch, what should we do now? And literally this happened last month. It was the second week of September. School was 10 days in, and somehow we had finished a programming language, which is like saying you had finished writing or reading or dancing or playing an instrument. That instead of developing fluency and of looking for new kinds of ways of expressing ideas through that medium, they think of it merely as a list of commands to teach in a specific order. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we can send materials to kids. The BBC Microcontroller Development Board, with a remarkable amount of power for learning to program, for physical computing, for robotics, for conducting science experiments,
light, small,
with a couple LEDs and some alligator clips, costs under $20. We can add speakers and light strips for more artistic projects. We want to take it into the arts. We can combine it with motors and lights and sensors to build robots, or we can conduct science experiments with these materials. And at retail price, not in quantity, for under $100, kids can have a remarkably powerful physical science, physical computing, computational thinking, computer science laboratory in their bedroom. Early on in the pandemic, Charlie Rosen, who's a great composer, plays about 36 instruments, had 5 shows on Broadway last year, even though he's only 30. He runs something he calls the 8-Bit Big Band, where they perform video game music with a full orchestra. And he wrote an arrangement of a Super Smash Brothers theme and posted it online, and had all of the parts you could download, had a track you could play along with, and instructions for how to record your part and share it with the world. And when they collected all of these and put them together, they ended up with this symphonic performance of 640 musicians, or 664 musicians, something like that, all performing from elementary school through principal musicians in orchestras around the world. You can be something big. You can be part of something bigger than yourself. And my musician friends are reporting that kids are actually making huge leaps in their technical prowess, in their skill as musicians during this time, because as opposed to traditionally sitting in a section and flubbing a note and having the music pass by and nobody catching you, when you have to record the part yourself and share it with your peers, now all of a sudden you have to be more meticulous in what you're doing. And that sharing with the peers is really important and practical. One of the ways we deal with the stress level and the amount of the workload that teachers are facing is don't do so much. Yeah. That if the work is public, if kids are constantly commenting on each other's work, providing feedback, asking questions, building upon it, challenging one another, then the part that you do is less urgent, less important. There's choirs from schools that are creating wonderful music, and school ensembles that are creating wonderful music this way as well. Sorry, we're just rushing for time, but.
So we do want to talk about what's next. We do believe that the teaching and leading that you can do today will pay off in the long run. It's not going to take a 90-degree turn. It's not going to all come to a halt and then everything's back to normal. The normal is changed forever. As somebody once said, in the very near future, schools will no longer enjoy the monopoly on children's time that they currently enjoy.
Hey, that was me that said that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How about that?
It's the only time I ever put on my funny hat and X-ray glasses and grab a crystal ball and predict the future.
You're a futurist.
It's just a fact that in the future schools won't enjoy the monopoly on children's time they currently hold.
What do I mean by that? It was happening before.
Yeah, it was happening. What I mean by that, I mean that the school schedule is going to be more flexible. Some kids are going to spend more time, some are going to spend less. It might be nights, it might be weekends. That maybe eventually they won't have to get up before sunrise, even though all the research for decades has said we shouldn't do that to kids. But when we were an agrarian society, kids stayed home with their parents on farms. When parents went off to work, kids went off to school. Before the pandemic, increasingly parents were home more than they used to be. Now it's a lot more than that. And it's creating an awareness that things need not be as they seem. And that maybe school isn't the only place in a kid's life where education takes place. So we need to be able to ask ourselves and answer the question, how do we gain the greatest benefit from being co-located in the same space at the same time?
Whatever space means.
Yeah, and paradoxically, it turns out to be the things that school tends to devalue: art, music, drama, engaging in productions and science experiments and field trips and excursions, the things you can't do as well or as readily through a book or through a screen. And we need to really come to grips with the question of, how do schools create the conditions for students to become great at something? And that something is really just an X. It's really just a variable, because I'm not concerned about what the something is, just that there is a something for each kid. And that's why it's so critical that schools introduce children to things they don't yet know they love. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about making schools better places for kids to learn is because the stuff that brings the most joy and beauty and purpose and meaning to my life were the things that I learned at a public middle school: to compose music, to play the trumpet, to love jazz, to program computers. And I'll be damned if anyone will deprive my grandson or my granddaughter of those experiences because we think some arbitrary list of facts is more important. You know, I was in Reggio Emilia, Italy, a couple of years ago, and I was exploring one of their public exhibits, and there was a statement posted that said, "We are indeed partisans on the side of the child." And I thought, wow, that's really gutsy to say publicly, but they walk the walk. And I think in these increasingly polarized, chaotic times, if we're not willing to stand between the kids and the madness, who will? And this is an opportunity for us to really dig deep and to live our values. And we can talk, forever about whether we should honor what teachers believe, because beliefs are kind of flimsy justification for what you do. But at the very least, we should recognize that we're there to serve the kids that we're lucky enough to be in service of. And perhaps we should wake up every morning and ask ourselves, how do I make this the best 7 hours of a kid's life? How can I better delight in the company of the nutty kids? When it's more fun to teach, it's more fun to learn as well. And we should recognize what Deborah Meyer always says, that teacher working conditions are student learning conditions. So there's lots of things we can do going forward.
We always want to focus on what matters. If you're spending a lot of time on something that's really not benefiting you or the kids, maybe you let it go. Maybe you don't do A+ work on that planning document that the school district that will never be read. Maybe you let it slide a little bit. That's part of sort of obeying the COVID dictator, but not always doing it in an even fashion.
We should assume that kids want to be here or there, whether it's here or there. I never worry about classroom management because I never walk into a classroom assuming I need to manage anyone. I go in with an open heart and open mind and say, hey, we've got stuff to do. Let's get on with it. We should embrace the affordances of being online. We have to learn how to say no. Say no. Are you afraid that people are going to look askance at you? Maybe the best thing we could do is work to the clock. I like to say that kids gain the greatest benefit from spending as much time as possible in the company of interesting adults. So be an interesting adult. Embrace that hobby. Read a book. Watch something interesting on television. Learn a piece of software yourself. Collaborate with colleagues.
Burning out is not helping anyone. You know, there's more that your students can do. If they can learn to use a piece of software, they can learn how to teach a piece of software. You don't have to know every single variable and drop down and you know, have every lesson prepared ahead of time. Let the kids handle some of that. Maybe you use cohorts from different grades. Maybe fifth graders can help kindergarteners read. Let them, you know, meet together in Zoom. You can deputize kids to do all kinds of things that relieves you of these, you know, smaller things that you don't need to do. And it helps them.
We should be more human and humane. You know, it seems like common sense, but reading to the students who know and like you is better than you playing a tape of even you reading to them, of having that human element involved. And we should look to other models of people learning and living together. And maybe, like Sylvia, not only do we let some things go, but maybe we forgive a little bit. Maybe we add some grace to the equation. Maybe we recognize that everyone is up against things right now.
Everyone is anxious. This is making everyone crazy. You know, don't let your anxiety about things translate into over planning and over controlling and assuming that the kids are anxious and that, you know, they have to be you know,
don't smile till Christmas.
Yeah, right. I mean, this anxiety that everyone's feeling obviously translates to what we do. We have to give ourselves a break in these times.
And what happens when we're so anxious about planning, right? We become,
a lot of times when you're anxious about planning, you plan more. You do the exact opposite of what you need to do. You know, sometimes you just need to kind of let things go and let things evolve. And if it's your anxiety that's you're translating it, you're misinterpreting what you think you're seeing from other people.
Like I said earlier today, it's just school. You know, sometimes a lesson stinks up the room. And you just, okay, see you tomorrow. We get another shot at it, right? We want to create a context in which we can coexist. And we can co-create and we can co-construct knowledge and where everyone gains benefit from being together.
And we could go on forever. And we want to take a minute and dip into the chat that we can't see and make sure that we have time for wrap up. Share the resource link once again. If you saw something you liked, it's on the resource link. If not, email me, I'll put it there tonight. There's lots of things to share and to learn as a community. And
during the workshops, we'll be doing, as we said, actual activities in planning and prompt setting and identifying good projects and recognizing that one of the primary roles of educators could be as a researcher to understand the thinking of each kid, to make private thinking public, to make invisible thinking visible. And how do you get there and how do you do that in order to create the richest kinds of learning experiences possible, regardless of whether we're face-to-face or online or a combination of the two. So thanks to Homa and Will for this invitation. Thanks to all of you for missing 2 football games and the town hall with Joe Biden to be here with us. Thank God for a DVR because I'll be watching all of those while feverishly writing ISTE proposals at the 11th hour. But I hope some of you will be able to join us later this month. And like I like to say, we give a lifetime guarantee. We're easily found on the internet. We're happy to help you do whatever we can to make the world a better place for kids. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Gary and Sylvia. Really, really appreciate it. Gary, if you could unshare your screen really fast. Yeah. We're going to get one question in after one just little announcement just to clarify what's coming up. So Gary and Sylvia have graciously agreed to do a 2-day, 2-hour workshop that's 4 hours that will go much more into depth around a lot of the things that they talked about here today, tonight. And it's going to be held 19th and 20th October. And they're going to be working hard for this because they're going to do 2 sessions, one that's going to run from 11 to 1 and the other that's going to run from 8 to 10 both days. So we would invite you to come and take a look at that particular. There's a lot more detail on our website. And basically, if we're a real believer in bringing teams to these types of professional learning opportunities. So if you bring 4 people, please feel free to bring one on the house, and we'll be that's already up there for registration. The link is already live, so hopefully you will be joining us for that, because I know that Gary, you know, and Sylvia in the chat, a lot of people were saying that it's really inspiring, and it's nice to dream a little bit and to get out of our heads right now when we're so just kind of boxed in by, you know, by COVID and the restraints and kind of the logistics of getting through the day. I think there was just one question in the chat that I thought was kind of interesting, and it was something along the lines of, you know, I think one of the things that we're realizing is that school is in lots of ways childcare, and we've built society around that idea that our kids are going to go to school for 7 hours a day so we can go to work and we can, you know, we can kind of do what we need to do for the economy and for ourselves, whatever else. But I mean, I wonder what, and this was kind of the question, what is going to be the new kind of answer to the question, why school? What is it going to be in the future that's going to make schools this kind of different mental model, this different narrative? What's that going to end up being? And I know that we're not taking a right-hand turn here, but that we're accelerating it. I mean, any sense of what this is going to look like in 5 years or 10 years or whatever?
Oh, I'll give you all my wise guy glib responses.
Please do.
You know, any number of us who have been doing this for a while have been on panels every year for decades about the future of schools. And I like to say that schools will be exactly the same as they are today. There just might not be any kids there. You know, a friend of mine recently said that after the pandemic, you know, schools will never be the same again. And I said, no, I believe they'll be the same again. I think it is clearly the case that, like I said, I don't think they're going to enjoy the monopoly on kids' time, but I think a lot of what we're seeing now is what Seymour Papert used to call the last flick of a dying dragon's tail, and the kind of authoritarianism and top-down control of what happens in classrooms. This centralization of it is kind of, it could be viewed as a dying institution trying to reassert its dominance. But like I said at the beginning of this, and I've written about it, there's an article on the website called "This Is Our Moment." I found right before this all happened, there were more schools interested in the kind of nutty stuff that I've been talking about for decades than any time in my career. Schools that were saying we're getting rid of grades and subject areas and age segregation, and that the entire school is going to be project-based. And the challenge then is, how do the adults get up to speed in realizing that vision? That's the work that I love doing and find myself doing in schools where, as Sylvia used the analogy earlier, we're building a plane while flying it. There are a lot of people who have in their hearts the desire to do the right thing and haven't yet had any practice with it, don't know what it looks like. You can't choose from what you haven't seen. You can't choose from what you haven't experienced. So a lot of my work has been concerned with putting teachers in context in which they experience using these new materials and technologies and teaching practices in a way where they know what it's like to be a learner and what's possible. You know, you and I will, when we were on the road together, whenever that was, because I've lost track of time, was, you know, that you said, you know, we shouldn't be concerned with the how questions. We should be concerned with the why questions. And we got into a really good argument about people can't answer the why question if they don't know how to do anything. And so there's this balance of, we have to help people know how to do genre study and why that's valuable, and know how to discern what's an effective project in order to be able to articulate why kids are learning more effectively that way. So I think there's a really delicate balance and a dance between the how and the why that's really important. But people can't choose from what they haven't seen. And when I run family workshops and parents see through the eyes and the hands and the screens of their kids what's possible, they demand a new educational diet for their children. I've watched school turn on a dime after 90 minutes with parents and kids working together.
I think in the future we'll see more models.
Right.
And we'll
right.
the opportunity for teachers is to grab onto those models and be ready to say, I'm going to commit myself to a new school a school that looks like, an open source classroom, a school that looks like a homeschool cooperative, a school that looks like, a library, a school that looks like, anything else. And even within the structure of a normal school district, there may be more opportunities. And you may be presented in the near future with making choices that might seem really scary, but represent that future.
Which like citizen science isn't a new idea.
Yeah.
These ideas have gone back decades. And, we may, and I hope we'll let 1,000 flowers bloom. Every so often, I know this happens to you guys as well. You get invited to, spend an hour with some billionaire who's got the vibe, the buzz, the juice, and wants to revolutionize education. And they always want to build 100 of something. And it's, well, why would you build 100 of one thing? If you want to know what the future of education is like, why wouldn't you build 100 different things? And all of this is possible only if we're willing to recognize some, find some humility in ourselves.
And bravery at the same time.
And commit deeply to democracy and democratic values and full participation and a view of children as citizens
and trust
with
them,
rights.
Trust them, trust teachers. Yeah. Trust. This is, the idea of a community is so powerful, but it has to be a community that trusts and respects one another. There. How's that?
I think that's a fantastic exclamation point to end on. And I don't know that you realized, but there were some comments coming on the chat, and I think your final discussion, your points that you were making at the end sort of address those just naturally. And I think that's what a lot of this is about, is that the answers come sort of naturally. So here we go. We're trying to live what we are believing. So
natural is a really important word. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but learning is natural.
Yeah.
And if you don't actually believe that learning is natural, then you have to invent all kinds of concocted, coercive means of making people do stuff that's not in their interest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The word trust is coming in the chat. The word living your values, all of those kind of foundational points. So Gary and Sylvia, this has been amazing. Thank you again. There's so much more now that we want to know. And I'm really excited about getting to spend the 4-hour sessions with both of you to dive deeper. I've been sitting on these twice today, and I've learned new things each time. So I really appreciate it. And I know that participants are going to be in for a treat. So we're really excited about that. And we have to say thank you again to Blackbaud. There's the bit.ly link, BQI Blackbaud, to see what some of their services are and how they support powering your passion. So thanks again. I'm loving that there are more questions still coming in. And I do want to share one more question. We are over our time, but the issue of racial discrimination was not addressed, but it is fundamental for the education, for success of Black and Brown students. And we could not agree more. And this is, we believe that equity and justice must be centered in the equation for innovation and change. And if it's not, then it isn't innovation and change. So
may I ask a big question?
Yeah, please do.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I didn't want to, I will model what we were talking about that will involve everyone in this question.
Okay.
In the past couple of weeks, I've seen NBA stars and NFL players say, no one taught us about voting. African-American players. And they're now getting motivated, aroused, engaged in the democratic process. And the question I want to ask of the educators who are gathering, because should we understand what that statement to be literal? Should we understand that when an NFL All-Star an all-pro player or an NBA all-star, says to camera, swallows their pride and says, no one taught me about voting or the importance of voting. I recognize that we live in a society that's deeply racist, and that the racism is 400 years old, and it's baked into the story of America, and that racism is systemic. But is it in fact the case that there are teachers not teaching kids about voting and not teaching certain kids about voting in order to disempower entire communities? And if that's the case, one, cut it out and do something about it. And two, what can we do about that? As you said, that, and I've said in other contexts, the best thing we can do for social justice is, one, to love kids, all of the kids, to treat them with humanity and dignity and respect, to recognize what the educators Reggio Emilia have taught me, which is that from the time a kid is born, they are a full citizen with all the rights that go with a participant in any community, in any nation, any town, any state, any classroom. But I really want to ask the question. This is kind of one of those how questions again, to come back to the discussion Will and I were having. Is it possible that there are kids in America who don't know that voting is important, or that they're allowed to, or that they should, or the value of it? And if that's the case, here's something you can all do every day from now till November 3rd. You can remind the children in your classroom that their grown-ups in their lives should vote. And if you think that that's something you can get in trouble for doing, one, you can't, but two, I'm afraid that's problematic as well. I don't know how we can live in a society where it's possible for some of the people who achieve at the highest level to have never heard that they could spend 1 minute every couple years and go somewhere and pull a lever or sign their name or punch a hole and be a full participant in their democracy. So that's kind of a rhetorical question, but I wish we were having those kinds of discussions in public.
Yeah.
Because it's possible that I don't think there was some meeting somewhere in some secret meeting in urban America that said, you know what, let's not tell these Black kids that their families can vote.
But you know what? Even if there wasn't, it doesn't matter. I think one of the things, it goes back to this intent versus impact gap. And so it doesn't matter if the intent of a teacher was good. If they never touched on that, if they never, if it wasn't on the test, it wasn't in the curriculum, and those kids did not have, and people have been feeling so disenfranchised, then the fact that they may not have had ill intent, to me, doesn't really matter.
And if you don't want to remind,
the impact was traumatic. The impact was harmful. And so that is the case in communities that feel like their vote doesn't count. And guess what? There's so many blocks to their votes too. Like, that's the other thing to learn about, right?
Great. So if you don't want to, as a teacher, every day from now till November 3rd in the United States, remind kids to share with all the grown-ups in their lives that they should vote. Maybe then between now and then, every day that you're in contact with kids, they should vote on something in your classroom, that they should get in the habit of voting, regardless of what it is. Let's make that a habit.
And I think that goes back to also the whole idea of citizenship education, as opposed to, people are like, oh, it's political, we don't want to talk about politics. It's like, this is civic duty, this is citizenship. Let's learn what that means. It totally transcends partisanship.
I put a lot of resources on equity and inclusion and diversity on that resource page, because I knew we weren't going to be able to give it enough time in this session. But there's part of it goes back also to what we were talking about with experience. A lot of kids who are underprivileged are kept away from real experiences in science and math, and there's there's all kinds of rules about ELL students can't be in the STEM club because they're supposed to learn language first. Well, you learn language by doing interesting things that you want to talk about, and that's proven by research. There's a couple of really interesting research, very recent, very new research studies that talk about the effect that hands-on learning has on kids. And hands-on doesn't mean the stuff. It means the things that Gary was talking about with programming. It means design. It means having a rich conversation with an adult, watching two adults have a rich conversation.
Right.
A lot of kids are deprived of those experiences. Well, they're told to, learn the basics. It's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. I think, kids who are whose lives are devoid of experiences need more experiences, and they need them in ways that empower them, that make them feel powerful, that make them feel in control, that they can find answers and say something smart that people will listen to. And if we don't have anything interesting for them to do, they won't learn to do those things.
And I just put a button on this. Teachers tend to be the largest employment group in society. If teachers in any jurisdiction, pick a size, small village, town, city, state, country, voted their interests, they would win.
Mm.
Right.
Well,
ta-da.
Always interesting.
We need more time.
There's so much more. We are going to do a webinar just before the election, I think last week of October. Will, do you remember what date we set on the infodemic and
I
navigating?
think the 26th maybe, but don't quote me. I'll have to go look, but yeah.
Will Linda LaRouche be there?
Will Richardson's going to be there.
I'll say
Oh.
No, I mean, I didn't mean to.
No. Thanks a lot.
Said it.
That was really
God.
great.
No.
This is what happens when we go over time.
Exactly.
We
Now
are
we won't
way
get
over
in trouble.
time,
We just go flying off in these directions,
Yeah.
and we just, anyway.
but
Well,
we
listen.
have a lot of people have stayed with us, and so
Yeah.
we're really grateful for that.
The hang
And
matters. We found that. We
The
did
hang.
an online
Is that what this is
online
called?
session. We did an online session in June where the Zoom kept going for 2.5 hours after it ended.
See, Homa, we're learning webinar parlance now too. The hang. That's what we're in the midst of right now.
We're in the hang. Yeah, you get some of the best conversations at that time.
Right.
So
All right. Well,
thank
listen,
you.
Thanks, kids.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Gary.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, Sylvia.
We
Thank you,
appreciate
everyone,
all
for
of you.
hanging out. We hope you enjoyed it. Please go to bigquestions.institute and check out all the stuff we have coming up. We're working really hard to try to provide some really thoughtful professional learning during this very interesting time, and to help educators of every level just try to navigate this time and get through this, and hopefully come out the other side with some different practice and some different ways of thinking about schools. So we hope to see you down the road. And thanks again for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Yay.